Can you believe The Walking Dead started over 20 years ago? Yeah, it's been that long since Robert Kirkman first threw Rick Grimes and his crew into the middle of a Walker apocalypse, making their lives a complete nightmare at every turn. The man did not hold back. From the very first issue, it was clear that no one was safe, and surviving was going to be a brutal, bloody fight every step of the way. If you followed the comic, you know Kirkman had a habit of pulling the rug out from under his readers. Just when you thought someone might be safe, bam, gone. Or worse, they'd be left with some kind of horrifying injury that made surviving even harder. And one of the biggest moments that shook the fandom? Rick losing his hand. That one change threw everything for a loop. When the series finally wrapped up after 193 issues, Kirkman hit fans with one last twist, a time jump. Suddenly, we're looking at an older Carl Grimes, living in a world that his father, Rick, helped shape. It was a wild way to end things, but honestly, it fit perfectly with the way The Walking Dead was always willing to take risks. But let's go back a bit. One of the more interesting things Kirkman has admitted over the years is how much Rick losing his hand changed the way he had to write the story. In The Walking Dead Deluxe, number 105, a fan asked him straight up if he regretted that decision, and his answer, not exactly, but it definitely made things harder than he expected. Rick got his hand chopped off in The Walking Dead number 28, all because he refused to spill the location of his group to the governor. Savage moment, no doubt, and it cemented Rick as the kind of leader who would rather endure insane pain than betray his people. The fan who asked the question pointed out that this was a defining moment for Rick, shaping who he became later in the series, and Kirkman totally agreed. Now, Kirkman being Kirkman, he said he doesn't really regret story decisions once they're made, but he admitted that writing a one handed protagonist made things tricky. Like, how do you keep a guy like Rick Grimes feeling like the same awesome dude when he suddenly has a major physical disadvantage? Kirkman had to get creative. One of the funniest things he revealed was that sometimes Rick just did things he shouldn't have been able to do, like one handed or not. He still had to take down walkers, defend his people, and lead them through absolute chaos. So, yeah, Kirkman kind of had to bend the rules now and then. And honestly, fans kind of rode with it. Sure, it didn't always make perfect sense, but let's be real. This is a world where people are getting eaten alive by walkers. If we can believe in an undead apocalypse, we can probably let Rick doing the impossible slide every now and then. Eventually, Kirkman gave Rick a hook attachment, which definitely helped. It made things a little easier to write, since Rick had a functional replacement for his missing hand, but even then, it was still a challenge keeping him just as strong, just as effective, and just as much of a leader as he was before. The interesting thing is that Kirkman later admitted he might have made that move a little too early in the series. After all, he still had over 100 issues to go, and he had to keep coming up with ways for Rick to do things that logically shouldn't have been possible. That's a long time to work around one big decision, but credit where it's due. Kirkman made it work. He didn't back down from the challenge, and instead of letting Rick's injury weaken him, he turned it into one of the defining aspects of his character. It made Rick even more impressive because now he had to work even harder to be the leader his people needed. And let's not forget, The Walking Dead was never about playing it safe. This was a story that constantly pushed boundaries, made fans gasp, and took risks that most other comics wouldn't dare. Killing off main characters? Standard procedure. Huge unexpected plot twist? Practically a requirement. So, in a way, Rick losing his hand was the perfect kind of Walking Dead moment. It was shocking, brutal, and completely changed the game. And while it might have caused Kirkman some headaches later on, it ultimately made Rick's journey even more compelling. Even though Kirkman had to occasionally cheat to make things work, it didn't take away from how much Rick fought, struggled, and survived against impossible odds. If anything, it made his story even more legendary. By the time the series wrapped up, Rick had cemented himself as one of the greatest comic book protagonists ever. Losing his hand was just one of the many things he had to endure, and yet he still kept pushing forward. And yeah, maybe Kirkman could have waited a little longer before making that move, but at the end of the day, it added so much depth to Rick's character that it's hard to imagine The Walking Dead without it. So, whether you loved or hated the way Kirkman handled it, one thing's for sure, Rick Grimes losing his hand will always be one of the most memorable moments in The Walking Dead history. And really, isn't that what this series was all about? Pushing characters to their limits, forcing them to adapt, and making sure fans were always on the edge of their seats. Rick's journey was never meant to be easy, but man, did it make for an incredible story. And the craziest part, even after all the struggles, all the impossible moments, and all the times Kirkman had to bend reality just a little bit, Rick still never lost his edge. He was always that guy, the one who would do whatever it took to protect his people, no matter how messed up things got. Losing his hand didn't change that. If anything, it just made him even more determined to prove he could still lead. That's what makes Rick such a legendary character. He didn't just survive in The Walking Dead, he dominated. Even when the odds were stacked against him, even when it seemed like he was down for the count, he always found a way to come back stronger. And honestly, that's a big part of why fans stayed hooked on his story for so long. He was a survivor in every sense of the word. Let's talk more about Kirkman. It's kind of hilarious when you think about it. The guy writes this ultra grounded, brutal world where nothing comes easy, and yet, every now and then, Rick just casually does things that shouldn't be possible. Like, sure, you lost a hand, but you're still out here wrecking walkers left and right? Alright, Rick, we see you. And let's not forget the fans. They totally called Kirkman out on it, too. You know there were readers flipping through the pages like, wait a minute, how is he even doing that? But at the same time, nobody really cared, because at the end of the day, The Walking Dead was about the characters, not just realism, and fans wanted to see Rick be Rick, no matter how unrealistic it got sometimes. That's why, even though Kirkman admits he might have cut Rick's hand off too soon, it still worked out in the long run. It forced him to get creative with the storytelling, and honestly, it gave Rick an even more distinct identity. There are plenty of post apocalyptic heroes out there, but how many of them have a missing hand and still manage to be the ultimate leader? Plus, it added to the whole theme of sacrifice that runs through The Walking Dead. Nobody gets through this road unscathed. Everyone loses something, whether it's a loved one, a home, or, in Rick's case, a literal part of himself. But those losses are what define them. Rick losing his hand wasn't just a shock moment, it was a turning point that made him even more relentless. And it's not like The Walking Dead had a problem with characters overcoming insane injuries. I mean, just look at Michonne. She went through absolute hell and still came out swinging. Glenn took some of the worst beatings imaginable and kept going. Herschel lost a leg and still managed to be a wise old mentor. So, yeah, Rick losing a hand, just another day in Kirkman's unforgiving world. But in a way, it also made the governor even more terrifying. The guy was already one of the most ruthless villains in The Walking Dead, but chopping off Rick's hand, that was a power move. It instantly made him a bigger threat, because if he was willing to do that to Rick, what else was he capable of? It set the tone for just how brutal things were about to get. Looking back, it's kind of crazy to think about how much one decision changed the course of Rick's story. Kirkman could have taken it in a million different directions, but he stuck with it, and in doing so, he made Rick's journey even more intense. It wasn't just about survival anymore, it was about adapting, pushing forward, and proving that even when you lose a part of yourself, you don't lose who you are. At the end of the day, whether Kirkman second guessed the timing or not, Rick losing his hand is one of the most unforgettable moments in the entire series. It challenged him, it challenged Kirkman, and it gave fans yet another reason to root for the guy who just refused to go down. And really, that's what made The Walking Dead such an incredible story in the first place. But anyway, y'all, I'll see you in the next one.